analog synthesizers. They're beautiful to look at and they sound cool. But what if you don't have one? How do you live? Obviously, I'm kidding, but it is a question I get all the time. What is the best analog synthesizer for beginners? And I never know what to answer people because there's so many factors to consider. There's how do you intend to use it? What kind of music do you make? And of course, what is your budget? So instead of giving a single answer to that question, I figured I would make a video and we could kind of work through it together with a flowchart. In our quest, I'm going to be assuming that what you want is to learn the most classic kind of synthesis, the kind that was made famous by Moog in the 70s. That's actually called subtractive synthesis, and it's the kind that most people start with. We're going to build this chart together, and we're going to do it kind of as a series of questions. The first question being, do we even need a hardware synth? Are you hoping to play the synthesizer live? Because if so, then of course you definitely need a piece of hardware. But if you're just recording and you're recording on a computer, then I strongly suggest getting started with a software-based synthesizer first, before you dive into the world of hardware. There are a bunch of wonderful free plugins like TAL-Noisemaker and Surge XT, and those can teach you pretty much anything you need to know about analog synthesis without spending any money at all. The workflow when working with software-based synthesizers is also much, much smoother than it is with hardware, so that's another consideration. Okay, I'm done with my PSA about how you should use a software synthesizer, and for some reason you're still here, which makes me think you might actually want a hardware synthesizer. You want to turn physical knobs on an actual physical piece of hardware, and I don't blame you. The way something feels and looks makes a huge difference in terms of whether or not you're actually going to end up using it. I absolutely adore computers, I love programming, and at the same time, I much prefer separate physical pieces of hardware for making music. Which brings us to our next decision. Are we cool with digital, or does it have to be analog? What's the difference anyway? Well, from a user perspective, there isn't that much difference. Either way, there'll be oscillators, filters, envelopes, all of the same constructs. But under the hood, it's quite different. Analog synthesizers use electronic circuits to generate waveforms and filter them, whereas digital synthesizers are basically just little computers that generate ones and zeros, and then those ones and zeros get converted into sound. Some people can hear the difference between the two, others can't, but the main thing to know is that digital synthesizers are both much more flexible and much cheaper than their analog counterparts. In this video, I'm going to be leaning more towards the analog side of things because most people are going to want that, but I'll also be mentioning some digital alternatives along the way. The next and final question in our decision tree is, are you okay with a synth that is monophonic? And by monophonic, I mean it can only play one note at a time. Here's a quick demo. This is the Donner L1. It's a monophonic synth. Watch what happens when I try to play a chord. No matter what I do, it will always just play one note. Now, if you're new to synthesizers, you might be like, what? In what world would I be okay with that? And that's a valid reaction because since at least the mid-80s, it's been possible to buy cheap Casio keyboards that can play pretty much as many notes as we want at the same time. Like, how is it possible that they're still selling monophonic keyboards in 2025? Well, historically, most early synthesizers were monophonic. The analog circuitry for producing stable oscillators was expensive, and the switching logic that was required to switch between a bunch of different oscillators across a piano keyboard was complicated. And so the early synth pioneers like Bob Moog just didn't bother with any of it. Well, by the mid-80s, most manufacturers had caught up. There were a bunch of so-called polysynths on the market. These could play any number of different voices at the same time, but they were quite expensive. At the same time, cost-conscious musicians of the 80s and 90s decided that they wanted to embrace the limitations of those early monophonic synths. Groove boxes such as the TB-303 spawned entire genres of music such as acid house. Other artists like Boards of Canada and Aphex Twin embraced other monophonic synthesizers such as the Roland SH-101, and they made fantastic genre-defining music in the process. So anyway, if you decide that that's you want to embrace that limitation, well, the good news is that there are many, many options to choose from. There's the Arturia Microbrute, the Korg Minilogue, the Novation Bass Station 2, and then there's a whole bunch of clones of legendary hardware, things like the Donner L1, which is a fantastic clone of the Roland SH-101. They all sound great. I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. Some have features that the others don't. For example, of the ones I just mentioned, I think only the Korg Minilogue and the Novation Bass Station 2 have the ability to store presets. That's essential for some people and not at all essential for others. My favorite is probably the Novation Bass Station 2, but it's also the most expensive of the ones I just listed. Okay, that's enough talk about monophonic synthesizers because it's my strong contention that most people will want to play more than one note at a time. I think that because that's what happened to me. In about 2007, I bought a Moog Little Fatty, which is a very nice, elegant monophonic synthesizer, and I couldn't believe how limiting I found it. So anyway, I ended up selling it on Reverb, and I ended up buying the very first thing that's on our list of recommendations. Okay, so let's do this. We've funneled down. We know we want hardware, we want analog, we want it to be polyphonic. Let's run through all of our options, starting with the cheapest. The Korg Volca keys. This is probably the most underrated synthesizer on the market. Nobody talks about it anymore because it's not shiny and new, but it's dirt cheap and it sounds great. We can play up to 3 notes at the same time. And those 3 oscillators can be played separately or together as a unison voice, which is great for bass sounds and lead. It has a nice sounding filter and a somewhat limited built-in sequencer. All of this can be had for about $105 used. Pretty amazing. As a beginner, one thing you want to look for in any synthesizer you consider is what's commonly called knob per function, which basically means that all the controls need to be exposed. You don't want to be diving through menus or holding shift just to access vital parts of the sound engine. And the Volca keys is a prime example of this. Each knob does one thing and one thing only. It's not a perfect instrument. It's worth noting that it's not truly polyphonic. It's what's called paraphonic, which means that the filter and the envelope are shared across all 3 voices. So if you play a note and then you play another note, it's going to re-trigger the envelope, which can be quite annoying. I'm also not so thrilled with the sequencer, but for the price, it really can't be beat. If you put the Volca keys sound through a reverb pedal, you're in Blade Runner soundtrack territory immediately, which is pretty impressive for something at that price point. Okay, moving on. The Micro Freak. Okay, so remember how I said I would discuss digital options when the time came? Well, the time has come. The Micro Freak is one of my all-time favorite synthesizers. It's basically a subtractive synth, similar architecture to something like the Volca keys, except that instead of having a preset number of standard waveforms, it has 18 digital sound generation engines. And each engine has 3 parameters, and those can be modulated. The modulator system is a little bit harder to learn than like just a standard subtractive synth, but it's not so hard that a beginner couldn't master it pretty quickly. One thing I like about this synth is that the large variety of different sound sources means you're unlikely to outgrow it. And if you did, it might be to just upgrade to its larger sibling, the Mini Freak. There are 2 things that you need to know about it. First, it has a weird capacitive touch keyboard. Some people love it and other people really hate it, so that's worth knowing. Also, like the Volca keys, its 3 voices are paraphonic, meaning the filter and the envelopes are shared across all 3 voices. These can be had for about $250 on the used market. I made a couple videos about the Micro Freak a while back. I'll put links in the description to this video. Moving on. Next, we come to the Korg Minilogue, the first entry on this list for which I have pretty much no caveats. It's amazing. It's as if Korg said, let's just give people everything they actually need. Let's switch presets. It has 4 voices of polyphony, 2 oscillators per voice, a great sounding filter, patch memory, a sequencer, really no notes. There are two versions, a silver version, which I used to own, which is fully analog, and this black version, which is called the XD. It adds a whole digital engine on top of the analog oscillators. The original Minilogue can be found used for about $350, which is a fantastic deal. The XD version adds a digital sound engine, including effects. That can be found for about $440 used. Ultimately, this is my pick for the best beginner synth. It really meets all of our criteria. It's analog, it's polyphonic, and it's very easy to learn synthesis on. Before we wrap things up, there is one other synth that I think is worth mentioning. The Arturia Mini Freak, which is the older sibling to the Micro Freak. It's basically the same thing, but with everything slightly better. Instead of one oscillator per voice, you get two. Instead of paraphonic, you get true polyphony, and it has built-in effects, as well as a more normal keyboard. I love it. I even made a separate video about it. The only caveat, of course, is that it's digital and you have to be cool with that. I think one hang-up that people have about digital stuff is they think, if I'm really just buying a little computer in the shape of a synthesizer, why don't I just use my actual computer? And that's something you can actually do with a Mini Freak. They make a separate plug-in version of it, so it's your choice which version to get. So there you have it. That is my whole list. Honestly, I don't think you could really go wrong with anything that we've mentioned in this video. Of course, it's very easy to get bogged down doing research. The main thing is to just kind of pick something and go with it. If you buy something used and you don't vibe with it, you can usually sell it and hopefully not lose any money in the transaction. Also, if you're not sure that any of this is stuff you'd be into, I strongly urge you to get started in software first. It might really help you clarify what your needs actually are. Okay, I think that's it. Hope this was helpful. Go make some music.